This was episode 39 of The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, Into the Woods. And little disclaimer, it's been about a month since I've listened to this. So if there's any
same.
like super key detail, just drop it in the comments if I missed it. But basically, the party has escaped from Absinthe. They're traveling through the woods, and they are essentially trying to decide what to do next and where to go next. They're sort of looking for like the stealthiest pathway through these woods. Part of in traveling through here, Brennan asks like, "Hey, you guys probably want to take some time to take a breath, relax, and not go full steam ahead, because if you do, and if you come across anything, you likely won't have the spell slots or the energy basically to combat it." So the party kind of, they batten down for the next, I think it's like almost like throughout the entirety of the day, to allow people to rest and recover and be good to go. Part of the things that happens in the evening is a variety of conversations that happen. Ame notices that, not necessarily infighting, but very much starts to discover the levels of hierarchy for the I was gonna say Somnavin, but that's not right. That's Critical Role. The Empire starts with an S.
The Citadel?
Yeah, the Citadel's empire that it's part of. All that to say, you have the Azure Battalion, you have the actual wizards as well, and there's very much sort of like this camaraderie between the Azure Battalion. There is sort of like this ego with the wizards, and there's very much a lack of interplay between the two of them, where the wizards kind of see the Azure Battalion, as sort of like these oafish idiots, for lack of a better phrase, and the Azure Battalion themselves really sort of despise and dislike the wizards for their superiority over them. Ame notices this and has a couple of conversations, one with Sworn, who is, she's sort of like to Sworn like, "Hey, this is kind of interesting." And in fact, Suvi actually gets brought in. It's almost like Ame almost feels like, I better tell someone quick that there's like infighting, because like we may not make it through the night, was kind of the vibe. And both Sworn and Suvi are both like, "Hey, that's totally normal. Like, that's kind of how we roll, and it's really not a big deal." But Suvi's also kind of cognizant of how she wants to present this to Ame, because, you know, they've had tension in the past and issues in the past. And so she's kind of dancing around the topic, and it eventually is kind of like, "Hey, Ame, thanks for letting me know. I really appreciate it." Meanwhile, you have Ursulon, who is growing more and more bitter at the idea of still being on this mission, still being kind of like, you know, like, what are we even doing? What's the plan? Like, why are we still out here? And getting more and more frustrated that he's not with Kalaya. This is further challenged by the fact that Sworn, in talking with Ame and Suvi, realizes that, hey, we actually don't have enough rations. We don't have enough food to last us more than another day or so. Double this with the fact that our path forward is probably pretty precarious. We have to be pretty stealthy, and we have all of these horses that don't make a stealthy approach very simple. And so the idea that basically comes up is, not only do we need to get rid of the horses in order to be more stealthy, but also, since we're low on food, it's likely best that we kill and eat some of the horses. Now, if you recall, Ursulon, in like them first coming in to make it to Absinthe, Ursulon formed kind of a light friendship with one of the horses. And so Suvi is like, let me talk to Ursulon about this before, you know, we make any decisions. Basically goes to Ursulon and is like, "Hey, buddy, you know, bad news. Hey, we gotta kill the horses and let them go." Ursulon, being very like typical, not high ground, but just taking, not wanting to like ruffle feathers, is sort of like, okay, if that's what the mission requires, even though he's very frustrated about this whole ordeal. Eventually, Ame does speak with animals. She goes with Suvi to the horses and basically asks the horses, "Hey, which of you should we eat?" And I can't remember the name of Ursulon's horse that he liked, but
I can't
that
either.
there's that horse. But there's like another horse that says like, "I've been through many battles. It should be me. Like eat me." Like very like like very brave of this horse.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
around when this conversation is happening, these squirrels pop down and they're like, "Hey, are you guys looking for food?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, we know like where there's like a secret town that we can take you to where there is some food." And the party is basically like, "Okay, well, if we can avoid killing these horses, in a worst case scenario, we can maybe even offer a couple of horses in exchange for their material, for their supplies. Let's go to the secret town." And so the squirrels basically lead them to a secret village in the Shroud Mountains. That's like, I think it was like in like part of like the stonework of the mountain, or near a waterfall.
Yeah.
But why don't you take it from there?
Yeah. So they gather up and like Blake mentioned, they bring two horses to potentially trade with these people once they get there. And they eventually come across this town basically like hidden behind a waterfall, waterfall, excuse me. And we find out that this is called the village of Stonerill. And as they're approaching, they basically come across these two farmers. And the farmer says that, yeah, they made their, like, this isn't where they permanently live. This is basically like a stronghold that was created in case of emergency. And so they came here when the war and the violence broke out. And they're so happy to see Citadel Wizards. Like they're very excited to see Suvi. They say that they have seen soldiers previously, and that was about 5 days ago. And those soldiers were headed to Bracken. And they say there's about three scores of refugees like currently held up in this fortress in this stronghold. So Suvi asks if they have any supplies they could spare, and the farmers are more than happy to help. So basically, everyone enters this waterfall city, and they soon come to meet the matriarch of this place, Demura. And I hope I'm saying that right. It's been so long that that's just how I spelled it, so I don't know if that's how it was said or not. But she welcomes them, gives them a place to rest for the night. They can eat their fill, and it's basically like a lifesaver, essentially. Ame makes sure to feed the squirrels that had told her about this place originally. So she makes good on her deal and gives them some food. And then there's a little celebration, basically a feast celebrating these rescued soldiers. While this is happening, though, Ursulon is still kind of bitter about everything. And I think he brilliantly described it as an upset kid at their favorite restaurant. Cause like he wishes he could like be enjoying this celebration, but like, he's got other stuff going on. So he basically excuses himself outside from this party. And while that's happening, Silver actually approaches Ame and thanks her for helping to lead them here. But he's like, thank you. But by the way, please don't offer any commands to the troops because I think there had been a moment when they first arrived that Ame was like, hey, make sure you behave. Like we're guests here.
Yeah,
And so I guess Silver
that's
kind
right.
of he took that a certain type of way and was like, "Hey, like chain of command is very important. Don't need you confusing my boys. Like I know you're one of Suvi's friends. Talk to her." Like he was really polite about it, but it was basically
Yeah.
like one of those moments. And they kind of have a little back and forth where Ame just like doesn't take it sitting down and like says, you know, I have my expertise, you have yours. Just a little bit of a moment, not no hard feelings, I don't think ultimately though. But after that happens, we cut back to Ursulon, who again is outside, and he has some Imperial soldiers approach him, and they've clearly been drinking, some of them more than others. And basically, what's happened here is they apparently have been rumors that he's a spirit ever since the battle happened, but now he's wearing his glamour. So these soldiers walk up and like are basically trying to vet if he's a spirit. Um, and when they do, one of them gets like terrified and like I think even wets himself because he's so scared. And Ursulon is like not alleviating the situation. He's basically like giving them the death stare back. And so this kind of escalates a little bit, and the super drunk guy actually takes a swing at Ursulon, but he misses. And so Ursulon just kind of grapples him and then realizes like this can only go bad places from here. So he just gets off the guy and like steps away, and some other soldiers had like started to like maybe grab their weapons, but then they don't, since they've seen it's kind of calmed down. And Ursulon just straight up leaves the village after this. He needs to like clear his head. We then cut back to Ame and Sworn, who have a fantastic conversation about respect and loyalty and how they respectively view those things. And we find out that Sworn had like a mentor that had always believed in him, and he was like a screw up as a kid, but then he got his life together, and his mentor like never got to see him get his life together. Um, and that's like one of his like motivating factors, basically. But as they're having this conversation, Ame hears the commotion from outside with Ursulon. So she runs out to see the drunk soldiers, but doesn't see Ursulon. So she kind of shoots the fox off to go look for him. We then cut to Suvi, who has oh, I forgot to mention this. At one point, one of the random villagers here like comes up and talks to Suvi and is like terrified about the cannibals and all these stories that she's heard about the bad guys. And Suvi's like, they're not cannibals. Like, don't worry about that. But the girl doesn't buy it. Like, Aabria rolls really poorly.
It's like a not
So
one.
she's been, yeah, she's been dealing with that. And then we cut to her getting a room for the night. Like, she is coming to get rest, and Silver finds her. And they have this really sweet moment where Suvi tells him her true name. She gives him the piece of paper with Sovereign on it so that he can remember and bypass her name cloak. And then they just kind of lie down and rest together, and is a very sweet moment. We then cut back to Ursulon, who again is alone in the forest now, and he opens his divine sense. And Brennan describes all of the sounds of the forest that he can hear, all of the creatures and the spirits and the hums of the trees. But then he can also hear an old hum, one that used to worship night in this place. And that's where the episode ends. Again, episode 39 of Worlds Beyond Number, The Wizard, the Witch, and the Wild One, Into the Woods. If you want to hear our full thoughts and you are just on our recap video, be sure to check the description below.
Great job.
Into the woods. You too, man.
Is that part of the recap?
I've actually never seen